past several decades, millions of children, young people, and adults have benefited from expanded access to educational opportunities. Despite this, however, deep and persistent inequalities in education remain, while humanity and the planet face new, increasingly complex and interconnected challenges. Hello, everyone. You're listening to Industry Wide Conversations, your front row seat to founder journeys, leadership insights, and real stories behind how industries run. Now, education is key to changing course, yet it cannot do so through the same models and systems that have often reinforced competition, exclusion, overconsumption, and unsustainable ways of life. Renewed approaches are urgently needed to foster both individual and collective capacities for advancing social, economic, and environmental justice and well being. Joining us today is Simran Mulchandani, co founder and CEO at Rangeet, to discuss education and teaching in the way human brains think and learn. Hi, Simran. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Priya. Good, great to be here.
Likewise, Simran, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today.
Thank you.
And of course, we're going to talk a lot about the changing realm of education and how we can still remain core to our human values, while of course expanding our critical thinking and other capabilities. But let's start by telling our listeners more about Rangeet. I pretty much like the name, and could brief us about the company, its specialization, and alongside your role as well and your journey till date.
Thank you so much, Priya. So, you said you like the name Rangeet. Do you know where it comes from?
No, I don't. I would love to.
So, so Rangeet is a word we made up. It comes from the two Hindi words Rang and Sangeet. And because of the way Rangeet's Sikh curriculum is designed, social, emotional, and ecological knowledge curriculum is designed, which is play-based, human-to-human interaction, we decided to coin a name that actually embodies and brings to life that feeling. So therefore, Rangeet, Rang and Sangeet. So I love what you said earlier about the need for education to change. I'd love to introduce you to what one of our board members said to us, Mr. Sean Bellamy. He's the founder of the first democratic school in the United Kingdom. And he said this to me during COVID a few years ago, that we're solving the problems of a previous generation. He asked the question, is maths useful if there are no animals left to count? And we have incredible language teachers. But what if there are no forests left to describe? I completely agree with you that education isn't potentially serving the needs of today's children and the challenges of the future. The nature of work, relationships, family are changing. But education, I don't believe, is keeping up. And so we set Rangeet up, Karishma Manin and I, we set Rangeet up to address these very challenges. So we're a social enterprise. We work with governments, communities, private and public schools to equip every child aged 3 to 16 with the human skills that are essential to thrive. We think of Rangeet as a magical world where children enter into. It's richly illustrated, it's filled with characters, poetry, games, stories. You meet a treacher, a tree who's a teacher called Miss Juniper, who takes her little children who are elm, spruce, oak, peepal, neem on forest adventures to learn about the magical life of forests and trees and animals. You meet Mischief the Matchstick, who learns about the magical nature of the environment. You meet Worrywart, or the Hindi version, Chintamani, who learns about the importance of sharing their worries. So this magical world, and it's our social, emotional, and ecological knowledge curriculum. And what it does is that it nurtures knowledge, voice, and agency around well-being, societal equity, ecological sustainability, and today's most pressing need, digital citizenship. So Seek is delivered through a digital platform. So I want to be clear, we're not an edtech company. In fact, a lot of people refer to us as the edtech company that removes screens, because we really believe in removing screens. The technology is enabling teachers and parents to act as agents of change and measure impact. So we use technology for scaling to deliver a curriculum called Seek at Scale, so that teachers can inspire and create spaces of human to human interaction in their classrooms so that that Rangeet aspect of life comes out. So Seek is aligned around global educational frameworks. I'll be talking to you about NCF 2023, and it can be taught as a standalone subject or used to enrich and supplement textbooks. But most importantly, it's grounded in the latest in international learning science. It is valid today for today's needs, and Seek makes education both joyful and future ready. And my role is I am the CEO and co-founder, and I like to believe that Rangeet is helping me achieve my dream that the world should be a place where nature and society are at peace.
Great. That was such a wonderful overview, Simran, and I'm really glad to understand about Rangeet and, of course, the kind of specialization you're focusing on in changing, not changing, but I would say probably making education more inclusive by focusing on the social, emotional, and ecological aspects of it. Now, building on that, I think when we're talking about transforming education, it requires approaches, that are more just, sustainable, and equitable, that drives that focuses on the future of the humanity and planet. Of course, that includes involving digital technologies and ensuring that the education is equipping societies to adapt to and mitigate all the ecological devastation, or the reverse climate change, and a global agenda for research and innovation that is again inclusive, collaborative. So how do you define the human future of education, and what role does Rangeet play here?
Yeah, that's such an important question because we're literally at a point in life where we're losing our humanity. People are stuck behind devices, and actually interacting in the real world has become such a challenge. In fact, if I may, I'd like to just bring in a short story that will encapsulate this emotion. In our module called Connected, which is about developing digital citizenship in children, you meet a character called Leo. And Leo, like most of us today, is just looking at his phone all the time. Now, Leo comes from a species called the Phono sapiens. It's a word that we've described, that we have come up with. And the Phono sapiens are the descendants of us, the Homo sapiens. They're all bent over. They have huge thumbs because that's all they're exercising. Their necks are bent over and they're little fat, little overweight because they don't exercise. And through a series of events, Leo suddenly looks up from his phone because his phone malfunctions. And for the first time in his life, he looks up and he sees a beautiful world, blue skies, magical mountains, a squirrel, footballs. And he thinks to himself, my gosh, I've been missing this all this while. And the story is called The Boy Who Looked Up. And then Leo goes on this mission of bringing humanity together. And so connected to that, we're trying to bring that connection. So what is the human future? And in our case, the human future of education, it's one where schools not just focus on academic outcomes, but on developing well-rounded, resilient, and self-aware individuals. It prioritizes emotional intelligence, creativity, collaboration, adaptability, and purpose, along with foundational learning. We totally believe in the foundation of learning, but we think that today it needs a different scaffolding. And in this future, teachers are mentors and facilitators, not just content deliverers. You don't think of teachers as the sage on the stage, but we think of them more as the guide on the side. Classrooms are more interactive, inclusive, and rooted in real life skills. And students' well-being and agency are central, not secondary. India has done a lot of work in this regard. I was very fortunate to hear Dr. Kasturi Rangan talk about this several years ago. And the NCF, Indian National Curriculum Framework, stresses on this. So NCF 2023 states that children need holistic experiential learning experiences. In fact, if you delve deep into it, it talks about how a child must be prepared for education and what a parent's role in this should be. If you hear about it, it talks about good nutrition at the right time and without devices, mental health and well-being, a focus on cognitive development, and so on. It's very remarkable. And I'm so proud of the NCF 2023. But the question is, are our schools actually executing on this? So what role does Rangeet play? So we play the role of equipping teachers with playful structured tools to build well-being and future skills. We focus on teacher empowerment and community. So change is sustainable and not one-off. We work within existing school systems to embed these skills at scale and not just as add-ons, but as a core part of learning. And in a sense, what Rangeet is doing is it's helping bridge the gap between what education needs to become and what classrooms can realistically implement today.
That's such a powerful perspective, Simran, and thank you for sharing that. And it reframes how we think about education beyond just the curriculum and innovative ways. And I think the future of education isn't just about smarter systems, but more about human systems where empathy, adaptability, and individual growth take center stage.
Yeah.
And I think what Rangeet is doing here is particularly interesting because it's not trying to replace the, human element with the advent of technology, but
No.
rather
Yeah.
amplifying it. It's about creating an environment where learners feel seen, supported, and empowered to think independently.
Yep. Absolutely.
Definitely. Now, it has always been like that. Most of the education institutions have focused on academic performance and standardized tests, and I think that can leave little time for, these crucial education components. So instead, most school emphasize solely education, ignoring the emotional and social intelligence. But today, the requirement of today's era, I would say, is that students must possess the social and emotional intelligence to excel professionally as well as personally, because these skills help them understand and efficiently control their emotions, interact, effectively with others, maintain and establish relationships, resolve issues, and eventually make wise judgments. So, how important is the classroom as a space for building this social intelligence, and what risks do we face if it doesn't happen in the future?
Yeah. Really important question as a follow on, Priya, because, it's one thing talking about it in abstract terms, but it's all the more important to think about practical ways that we can do this. So, again, taking a little bit of a step back to understand how we got here. So, if you think about the period from the time that all of us got into social media divided us, right? We are more connected than ever before, yet most of the younger generation is lonelier than you can imagine, right? We're seeing teen suicides, cyberbullying, social comparison. The list is endless. How do we solve this? And to make matters worse, we now have AI. And please don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-tech. I'm extremely very pro-tech. I personally have a degree in computer science and I built the Rangeet app along with my team. But I always think about the mindful use of technology. So in this turbocharged world of social media and AI, what can we do? Right? How do we create social intelligence and what are the risks if we don't? So back to the classroom, there's a lot that we do at home, but back to the classroom, which is where a lot of the kids are spending a lot of their time. The classroom is one of the most critical environments for building social intelligence. It's often the first structured space where children regularly interact with peers, outside of your family, outside of your siblings and stuff. It's where you navigate differences, where you manage conflict, and crucially, learning how to collaborate. Students will learn in a classroom that is empowering. They will understand how to regulate their emotions. Firstly, what their emotions are. They will learn to listen and empathize and communicate clearly. They learn to collaborate and handle disagreements. And they learn to respect diversity and build a sense of belonging. Isn't this what the world is about, right? These are not just abstract skills. This is what we deal with every day. And we're not teaching children that. We can't just let it happen on its own. And this, we believe, you can't think of this as a random thing that's done once in a while. This will only happen, and there's research to back this. This will only happen if it's developed through daily interactions, guided by teachers who shape the norms of what good behavior is, model that behavior, and do all of this in very, very safe spaces. Now, what happens if we don't do this properly? Now think about the world today and think about the people you are around and think about what is success. Imagine you've got someone who's phenomenal at bookish knowledge, but they have poor interpersonal skills. Will they be able to work in our environments? If they have low emotional resilience, and we're seeing this so much, high anxiety, stress, inability to cope with setbacks, can they cope? How will they cope with conflict and exclusion, bullying, lack of empathy, fragmented communities? Will they be workplace ready? Will they be able to collaborate? Will they be able to lead, learn on the job, deal with setbacks, be resilient? In fact, resilience and grit are probably some of the most important skills that children need. So, in fact, I feel like sport is amazing and it teaches children so much around all of these issues. My son, for example, plays cricket for Mumbai. I see his journey and I think about the skills he's picking up and I feel, wow, if I could hire someone who has the discipline of a sports person, that would be amazing. They would be able to fit into all because they've dealt with setbacks, they've dealt with hard work, they've dealt with being able to be resilient. And so if we can bring those kind of qualities into classrooms, that will be amazing. So in short, if classrooms don't intentionally build social intelligence, we risk raising individuals who may be academically prepared, but socially inept. And that has very long-term consequences for both individuals and society. The positive news is that we're seeing great interest in what we do at Rangeet. So our curriculum is being deployed at scale in Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Uttarakhand, outside India, in Africa, in Liberia, Namibia. And very importantly, these are very youthful countries. If I tell you the median age of a country like Liberia, you'll be shocked. It's 19 years old. These populations need guidance. And we need to arrest these very problems in these environments and these countries where there are ruptured societies and families. Time is running out. And we at Rangeet are committed to solving these problems at scale. And we're committed to mitigating all the risks we see.
That was very wonderfully put out, Simran. And I think, we often overlook the conversations around digital learning. The classroom isn't just a place for, academic instruction. It's where students actually learn how to read a room, navigate differences, collaborate under pressure, and build empathy in real time. So these micro interactions eventually shape individuals as how they can function in teams, workspaces, and society at large. And if that layer of social learning is missing or diluted, of course we are not just talking about quieter classrooms, but we are potentially looking at a generation that may struggle with conflict resolution or emotional intelligence and sometimes even basic interpersonal communication. And in a world which is increasingly becoming interconnected, these skills are not optional, they are very much foundational. Great. Moving ahead, Simran, now student performance in the classroom is rarely a one size fits all metric. While we often lean on old assumptions about what drives results, a growing body of evidence suggests that our traditional obsession with strictly core academics might be missing the mark. The concept of education being solely about academic study and associate performance measurement is an entrenched and arguably an outdated one. And contrary to this, an approach that prioritizes character building, treats personal growth as the central metric of success. So we are witnessing a rise of character focused education, an approach that prioritizes values to improve learning outcomes and which is also actively challenging the long held wisdom of the past. So while we have discussed what is something crucial, how social adaptability is important and plays an important role in the education, how can education systems shift their focus from this performance metrics to more on character development?
Yeah, again, that's such an important building block if we are to see success. One is sort of your implementations, etc. And then the other thing is finally, it's what teachers are judged on and it's what children are judged on. And so those metrics need to be really thought through. But shifting from performance metrics to character development isn't about abandoning our academics. Yeah. It's just about tweaking it and reorienting and redefining what success includes and aligning the system accordingly. So we're not saying throw this thing away. because that's silly. We're talking about just reorienting a little bit. So, including more, broaden what systems measure drives behavior, right? Teachers, if you tell teachers what the measurement is, then that drives behavior. So, along with test scores, not abandoning test scores, we need to think about how we include well-being, collaboration, resilience, and engagement through simple, consistent tools. So again, in the NCF, there's a wonderful new way of measurement. They're looking at what, rather than labeling a child, we're talking about in the NCF, what does a child need? So I think that's a wonderful reframing. You know, then I've talked about this before. We need to embed, not add on. You can't have it as a separate subject. In fact, just today I'm going to meet the teachers of the Cathedral and John Connon School, and we're talking about all of these subjects. How do we bring this in, and how do we embed and not think of this as a separate subject? And it's wonderful to be talking to teachers from all kinds of schools about this, because we learn so much. And how are they building this into their everyday classroom practice? How are they doing group work? How are they doing discussions? So these are very crucial, and you only will be successful if you invest in teachers as enablers, as opposed to going to teachers and saying, here, do this. It has to be done collaboratively. So they need, from what we've learned, teachers need practical tools, they need training, they need ongoing support to build skills in classrooms. And very importantly, we need to make teachers feel valued and supported. And I'll tell you a quick story about this at the end. Then we need to redesign incentives and accountability. It should include school culture, student development, not just results, right? We want to really think about the overall aspect of what the school is, and not just what each individual student did. If I remember my school days, we were sitting in rows and columns, and each of us really was out for ourselves. If you think about it, I studied for myself. My academics were for Simran. Your academics were for you. But really, we never fostered that culture. We need to create time and space in the curriculum for character development and not squeeze it out, right? It has to be made very, very important. Engage parents and communities, right? There are so many schools I've been to where the administration is more scared of the parents than anyone else. And the parents are just shouting about academic pressure. We need to engage parents in this, bring them into the conversation, align their expectations around long-term development versus short-term scores. It's very important. You have to start with parents. And then, of course, we have to keep, there's a wonderful book about feedback. So all of these things, we can't just come in and say, boom, here's a program, run with it. Even at Rangeet, we don't prescribe that. Start with pilots in the real world, see the proof of concepts, understand how it's worked. Each context is different. Refine it and grow. So you don't shift focus by making grand statements. You shift it slowly, measurably, you reward and you enable teachers. And I just want to say that in our work alone, we see this in practice all the time. When we first started working, there was great resistance to what we did. I can assure you of that. But we stuck to it. Today, as we empower teachers and they see the impact on their own pedagogy, the impact on their own students, the results are nothing short of teachers embrace Seek, not just because they feel it's important, because they themselves are feeling recognized and rewarded. So we've launched a community of teachers, which we call the Seeker community, because we call each teacher a seeker. Every month, we reward teachers with recognition for their efforts. And recently, the press really picked this up. And the teachers felt so happy. And one teacher in Mumbai, I think it was, said in the newspaper that in my 32 years of teaching, I have never felt this rewarded. That's where the magic begins.
I agree with you, Simran, and I think it really challenges the way we have traditionally defined success in education. Character development eventually isn't something that can be treated as add-on. It
Yes.
has to be embedded into the very fabric of how education systems operate. Because moving beyond grades and test scores, boils down to a fundamental shift in a mindset
Yeah.
from, measuring what students know to understanding who they are becoming. And
Yeah.
uh, I think when we're talking about integrating values like empathy and resilience, integrating them into the everyday learning is especially important because these traits are something that shape not just better professionals, but more responsible citizens and leaders. And, I think that's I think if everything is done right, this shift could redefine the purpose of education entirely, where we are nurturing well-rounded individuals who are accountable themselves and can navigate the challenges and complexity with more integrity.
Absolutely agree with you.
Definitely. So, Simran, I think we discussed more about everything about, how social adaptability, resilience, empathy, critical thinking, all of these skills are so important, and, how our education systems and education institutions can adapt to this, a shift that is definitely most required in today's era. So, one last question for you is, how should we redefine success in education if we truly want to prepare future generations for life?
Sure. So let me think. So I think if education is meant to prepare children for life, not just exams, then success has to be defined much more broadly than scores and rankings. I think that a more meaningful definition of success could be, right? And I want to say this that look, these answers I give you, they will keep evolving, they will keep being tweaked. Yeah. But success means that a student knows how to learn, you know, learning to learn and knowing how to learn. So that comes from developing their curiosity, their critical thinking, and their adaptability. I think another one would be that a student knows how to be, how to exist. That could be thought through self awareness and values and purpose. Purpose in Africa right now, we're working in several communities where we're talking about purposeful resilience exist training. So I think we've lost our purpose as a species. And so we're trying to redevelop it and rebuild it. Then a person who knows how to live and work with others, someone who is empathetic, knows how to communicate and knows how to collaborate, and then apply their knowledge to real world problems and not just reproduce it in exams. I can tell you this for myself. I was a phenomenal student in high school, but no one ever asked me to think. I was wonderful at regurgitation. Then I went to college and I was asked to think. No one ever asked me to do that before. And it really took a while for me to learn how to do that. So, what does this look like in practice? We need to balance metrics, right? We need to balance academic outcomes with well being, engagement, and social emotional growth. We need to create environments for applied learning, projects, problem solving, and putting real life context alongside theory. We need to develop, and this I feel is one of the most important things, developing agency. What is agency? It's the ability to make choices and take action. We can teach people that the planet is burning, but that's only going to instill fear. If we tell children that this is what you can do, that is when the real magic happens. So lead learners learn to take ownership, reflect, and make choices. And the teacher's role shifts from content delivery to facilitating growth and relationships. So, what is this shift in mindset? At its heart, if we change the question from how much did you score to who are you becoming, I believe that that's where we will be really measuring things properly. So we should be judging education not by how well students perform today, but how well we are equipping them. And we need to hold ourselves accountable to this. How well did that child do in that test versus how well are we seeing them getting equipped to navigate life? Did we help them to do that? Did we help them to navigate its challenges? How to work with relationships, to grab opportunities, to deal with setbacks? What are we doing? And I'd like to tell you a very poignant story about, Karishma and I were in a school in Dehradun, and we saw this in practice. We were sitting in a school in Dehradun run by the Asra Trust, and this was a Rangeet classroom, and the teacher tells his students, "Hey, here are the Rangeet founders." And the kids were so excited, and they wanted to talk to us. And she said, "No, no, no, come to the front of the class." And tell them what Rangeet has meant to you. And this little boy, all of 10 years old, in his baggy uniform, goes to the front of the class. And this is a very, very low income school, and tells us this story about how during COVID, he had this friend who was 15, this girl, and they would play. And then one day, this girl told this boy, Deepak, "I'm not going to be coming to school from tomorrow because my parents are marrying me off." And he was horrified. And he talked to the teacher and he said, "This is not fair. I've learned that everyone has a right to education." And the teacher said, "Okay, you're right. What do you want to do about it?" Agency. And so together, the child, Deepak, and the teacher spoke to the parents, convinced them, and they actually delayed the marriage of this child. The impact of this on the girl's life is immeasurable. That boy probably doesn't know what he did. Maybe one day he'll learn. But this is really what it's about. That is success for me.
I agree with you, and such a very wonderful experience and an impact that you shared with us, Simran. And I think yes, our conversation reframes how we think about outcomes, not just as scores or degrees, but as the ability to navigate an increasingly complex and unpredictable world. And I think yes, we are accountable as to how well we are equipping our
Absolutely.
students to,
Yeah.
deal with the real world challenges rather than, just judging them or their capabilities on their scores and performances.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, Priya. If we are accountable,
Yeah.
and we need to make that, and we know, I think all of us in our hearts know the answer. It's just about believing you can make that change. Believing that when you look at the world and you see the things that are so important, that you believing that when you look at the world, you see what's happening out there
Mm.
and take action. Don't just sit quietly.
Yeah, I agree with you, Simran. And, I think we had a really wonderful conversation with you, Simran. And
Oh, thank you so
thank
much.
you for explaining that the future of education will not be defined by what students know in isolated subject silos, but by who they are empowered to become. And in an age where we have abundant knowledge, true educational success lies in nurturing character, purpose, and human potential. Schools don't need to transform, they just need to be reimagined as dynamic and human centered ecosystems where every learner is seen, valued, and supported. Thank you for your insights, Simran. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Priya. And let me congratulate you for picking up this subject and shining a light on it, because we need people like you who see this as important and bring this conversation into the mainstream. So I'm very grateful to you for this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, Simran. And I hope our listeners would definitely gain some life-changing insight, I would say, as to how they should think about education and what are certain things they need to see in education institutions while enrolling their children and students. And hopefully, we will see that turn of
Absolutely.
in these
And again, you hit the nail on the head. It's when parents start to demand
yeah,
and that shift happens, that will also push for
right,
change.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, all the best.
So, this is for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation around how education is changing, what are certain things we need to look at, and what does the future look like. Because at its heart, education must remain people focused, purpose led, and rooted in empathy. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.